Okay, so what is the perfect atmosphere for putting pen to paper and writing your music? How do you do that? Do you have to have everything nice and neat on your desk and you start writing, or is it while you're riding a bike, or is it while you're at the grocery store it comes to you? How does that work for a songwriter like you?
All of those things, yeah. I mean, I think the worst way to write a song is to sort of think, I got a few hours now, I'm blank sheet of paper, I'm going to sit down and write a song, And 3 hours later, you've probably got nothing. But songs really, for me, come out of experience, I think. And when there's sort of powerful experiences going on, then there's this sort of need to write, and the songs, it feels like they just sort of appear, if you know what I mean. I have been in situations where trying to write songs for an album, where you do have to sit down and sort of force the thing through, but quite often that doesn't produce the best results, I think. So I used to teach songwriting at the university here in Canterbury, which is where I live. And so one of the first things I said is, I can't teach you how to write songs, but I can give you a methodology. And one of the things is to always have a sort of notebook and pen with you, or these days, your iPhone or Android or what do you have, so that you can just jot down ideas all the time, because the ideas will come to you when you least expect them, and in the most inconvenient moments as well. So I think people who have friends who are songwriters are used to this sort of thing. Suddenly they've gone. Do you know what I mean? From the conversation, they're just like gazing out of the window and starting to hear something, or somebody said something and they're thinking about that. And so you're constantly on the lookout for ideas.
So you write from experience. Is with your new album, which I was really surprised to find out, Primitif is really your first solo endeavor.
It is, yeah.
And all 16 songs on that album, those are all written by you and experiences?
Yeah, I mean, there's two covers on the album. There's a Look of Love by Burt Bacharach and Hal David starts the album, and Lana Del Rey's Video Games ends it, But those were both kind of significant songs. They're not just sort of random, But yeah, the experience, I guess, was coming out of where I was in my life, which was a mixture of personal things that were happening. And also being at this sort of age, I'm past 60 now, I'm still writing songs, I'm still loving music. I have a sort of jazz quartet thing that I work with, and I say jazz in the most loose way because it's more prog, I suppose, But anyway, working with musicians here in Canterbury, there's a really interesting mix of musicians here, And I guess I just started writing some songs, without any particular end result in mind, but the songs just kept going, and about a year into this project I started thinking that I want this to be a double album, and I really want to make it big. And I think a couple of people have said to me, when they listen to this album, there are certain tracks they love, but it's really the cumulative effect of the whole thing that people are into, and that to me is what I wanted to achieve, in a sense, not what I set out to achieve, but by the time I was about halfway through writing it, I wanted to create an album. It's not like a concept album, although there are related themes, but each of the songs sort of relates to the others, and there are musical themes that keep recurring and so on. So I wanted to do an album like I experienced albums when I was a kid, basically.
And with the re-emergence of vinyl, you put this on an actual vinyl also, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Which again makes you, I was talking to somebody about this morning actually, makes you part of a sort of community in a way, there's obviously the online community of making music and digital music, and that's all great, But I guess maybe it's a younger demographic, and maybe the kind of people who buy vinyl are people who want to sit down and just shut their eyes and listen to music, which is not something that people do much anymore. Although this lockdown scenario has maybe created a time when people can do that again. One slight glimmer of light on an otherwise pretty dark scenario. I want it to be that.
Say what you want to say about the millennials, but at least they appreciate vinyl.
That's true.
When you're getting a little bit of success and your music career is going well, I know this is a silly question, but I have to ask it. Who picks your wardrobe? Do you, at a young age, even today, as you go around and you tour and you play concerts? Is it something where you're like, you know what, this is cool looking. I think I'd look really good on stage. Do you get input from people? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a funny one, that, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I do sometimes. I think there was a big sort of transitional thing in my life a few years ago, and I did. So one of the things that happened was I lost a lot of weight actually, and I think then. And also I started to do gigs again, and I probably hadn't really done many gigs at all during the sort of 2000, from 2000 till 2009. I did a few little things, but nothing much, So yeah, you sort of, I got more interested in clothes again, and I got more interested in all sorts of things actually, in sort of like living life to the full. I sort of made this decision of like do it now. Actually became my motto. I think when you have kids and you're living a sort of a life in the mainstream, if you like, it's very easy to sort of put off things that you want to do. And think, well, I'll do that sometime. But I suddenly got this sense that actually putting things off is the wrong way to live. You should do it now. I know that's very difficult right now, but maybe it's worth making that list in your quiet moments, and when we can all move around again, go to those places you want to go and see those things you want to see and listen to the music you want to listen to. I always wanted to go to Venice, for example, and spend time there, and I got to do that. Thank God, before all this terrible stuff happened. I always wanted to go and see an opera at the Vienna State Opera, and I did that. So I did all these things I wanted to do, and it became like a much more kind of exciting life in a way.
Was notoriety a positive for you or a negative for you? Like you're at the grocery store, someone comes up to you and recognizes you. How does that work as when you guys were as popular as you were?
Yeah, I think what was interesting was that we were signed to Geffen in Los Angeles, and our career was big in the States, but in the UK it wasn't so big. So when I was in the UK with my family and stuff, rarely would I get recognised and stopped in the street and stuff. So having the sort of whole fan thing happening in the States was kind of fine actually, because it felt like work, But I must say I've never really had bad experiences with fans. They're kind of always to a person polite and nice, and you've got to be grateful that people are out there buying your music and actually do recognise you. It's like, and particularly these days, I love it. It's very nice to have that sense of recognition and people's interest in what you're doing.
Are there songs that you're tired of playing?
I wouldn't say so, actually.
No?
Nick and I sometimes do these Wang Chung shows where we play sometimes just the three hits or three of the hits. I must say, it's not the playing that tires me on those shows or bores me or whatever the word is, but I always love playing. It's all the travelling and all the kind of other stuff that goes with it, and the hanging around, and it doesn't matter whether you're playing 3 songs or 30, do you know what I mean? You've still got to get to the venue, and you've still got to be there for the sound check, and you've still got to sit around, And I started to feel that I was really losing a lot of precious time, on those tours. I stepped back from doing it. The result was Primitif, which is exactly what I wanted, not exactly what I wanted to achieve, but it was sort of a sense that, I do have a lot of time that I can plough into these things. And so doing that was more constructive than sitting around to play Dance All Days, Let's Go, and Everybody Have Fun Tonight, again. But I love playing those tunes. I prefer playing slightly longer sets, because I think, when people hear Space Junk and To Live and Die in LA and Fire in the Twilight and all the different things that we've done, where the tracks have been used in movies or, have profiles of their own, I think most people think, wow, Wang Chung, I thought was this, but I didn't realise you did all this as well. So over the years, we built up this kind of legacy, I suppose, and to be able to play a bunch of those songs and some of our newer stuff as well, a gig is exciting, and that I very much enjoy.
Fire in the Twilight was awesome from the Breakfast Club soundtrack. I mowed a many a lawns to that song, man.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
So what is the music industry like today compared to when you guys first started out?
Yeah, it's very different. But in some ways, it's more manageable, I think when we signed to Geffen, the whole process of being signed to a major label is that they're investing a lot of money into what you're doing and into your kind of, 7 months in Abbey Road wasn't cheap, and then the videos at that time, they cost a lot of money to make and stuff, Obviously, I was paying for it, or me and Nick were paying for it, and have been paying for it for a long time since, But that's the game, These days, I guess it's all a lot more small scale, but I kind of like that in a way. And one of the things about Primitif that I like is that all the musicians on it are local musicians. I'm working with a record label that's based, more or less here in Canterbury. We film the videos in Margate, which is the town where my son lives, about 10, 20 miles from here. And so it's all more sort of manageable scale. So if I was hoping to get rich out of Primitif, then that's probably not going to happen. But in terms of the connection with people these days, you're more or less aware of every CD and album you sell. In fact, I was wrapping up a whole load of them this morning to post off. So it's a different game. In terms of the sort of satisfaction that it gives me these days, it's like big, compared with how it used to be. And I say that because there were a lot of frustrations when you were working with a major label and their agenda, and then your own sort of sense of how you wanted things to be. But I wouldn't want to complain about any of it, and certainly having the success I had in the 80s has enabled me to keep music as the central part of my life, and essentially pays for me to do things like Primitif, pays for that still, so it's all good.
Now, I saw where you actually sell autographed copies of the double album, right?
Yeah. So if you order it from my website, usually I can sign those, and that's how that works. Yeah.
What was it like? Jimi Hendrix. All these people who couldn't grasp fame. Was alcohol or drugs ever an issue, or how did you just have the passion for the music, or did you find something else to do besides getting into that crowd or into that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think because I had kids, by the time my Dance All Days came out, I had 3 children, and I was on my second marriage by the time Dance All Days came out. So I was kind of like, I've got to keep this together, when I spent 3 years at university in London, and then I spent a year at the Royal College of Music, and I lived with a friend of mine then, and we did various little, mind-expanding experiments during that time. And I think I sort of, it was fine, but I kind of think my main sense that I took away from it was a colossal waste of time. Not exactly waste, but it was very time-consuming. And I think I always had this sense of I just want to kind of get on. And I guess my relationship with music was always as well quite analytical in a way. I sort of felt I wanted to really understand how the music worked. So it wasn't for me like getting into a kind of detached state and just creating stuff. I was much more into structure of things, and that's not to say that it was all calculated at all. It was all coming from a strong place, but I never, in the short period when I dabbled in drugs and things, I never found it helpful creatively. I found I just kind of lost a lot of time, basically. So the short answer to your question is I never really went in that direction. Fortunately, Nick was not into that stuff, so we never attracted that kind of crowd around us, and it was kind of, it just didn't really impact on Wang at all.
Did I read correctly that your son is an actor?
I have 2 sons, yeah. One of them is an actor, yeah. So he was in a show, a soap called EastEnders, which is a BBC show that's still on, actually. But that was about 10 years ago. He was in it for about 6 years, from when he left school to about the age of 22, something like that. So he was very young. But he became massively, heartthrob kind of, teen star over here for a while, and I think if you'd be talking to him about fame and all that stuff, he'd be quite negative about his experiences. But then he had it much bigger than I ever did, and it really did impede his. He literally couldn't go out and stuff, and so it was a difficult time. But fortunately, I never really had it that bad.
When getting ready to go out on stage, were you nervous? I watched a lot of video footage before I did this interview with you, and Were you nervous? Was there something that calmed your nerves, or did you ever have any kind of, Rod Stewart was big on, he used to stand behind the speakers and sing at first when he first started his career. Was there any kind of stage fright, or how did you kind of get over that with what you do?
I think I was pretty sort of, I was very tense. When I look at videos of me playing in the 80s, I talk fast, I'm playing fast, everything's very, I sort of think, wow, just let it go. It's all fine. You're good at what you do. You just relax. Do you know what I mean? I didn't feel that at the time. I felt that it was very kind of like, I wouldn't say it was like, I didn't feel like nervous, frightened, but I felt nervous, like kind of ready to, fight or flight. I was definitely ready to fight, sort of, But these days, I enjoy it much more. I don't suffer from nerves anything like as much. I'm probably more nervous about whether I remembered all the cables and things I need than about doing the show. So,
doing your album in the same studio that the Beatles did, and all that stuff. I mean, and I know it goes by fast, and sometimes life goes by in a whirlwind. But are there situations in your life that you found, I would not be able to meet this person, or I would not be able to do this if it wasn't for rock and roll music?
Yeah. Well, I think some of the friendships, I have met some famous people over the years, and that's always a thrill, But I think some of my sort of the more enduring friendships, like with Bill Friedkin, we're still good friends. Tony Banks from Genesis, I did an album with him back in the 90s. We remain good friends. And Chris and Ross and all those guys. And they're all amazing people, very creative people that have led very interesting lives. And the ability to be able to really sit down and chat with those guys and hang out with them, go to their houses and stuff, that's really been... Those guys have really made me a bigger person, because you get a lot of insight into life through them, and the books they read and the movies they watch and the things they turn you on to, So it's all really interesting. So that has been very powerful.
And that Tony Banks, was that Strictly Inc. or Strictly Incorporated?
Yeah, so Tony does solo albums periodically, or did in the sort of 80s and 90s, and he doesn't write. He doesn't like writing lyrics. I mean, he can do it, but he prefers to get people in to do that. So I had actually done an album with Nick Davis, who produced the more recent Genesis albums and does all of their remasters and re-releases and stuff. So Nick is a very kind of bright, kind of engineer, producer, and I did do a solo album when Wang Chung split up, but it was never released, and I never really pursued it to get it released. Which makes Primitif my first solo album. But after working with Nick Davis, he recommended me to Tony to do some work on his album, and out of that came Strictly Inc. and this great album that I did with him. Tony was really writing some really wonderful music at that point with sort of Peter Gabriel Genesis sort of style. And those guys were, I listened to them a lot when I was a kid. So that was a big thrill.
What's it like to... Money's starting to come in. Do you have to have a pretty good financial head on your shoulders? Do you go out and find people to help you with that? Because you've seen some rock and roll stars which are penniless and they have to go out and do whatever they have to do to make money. And same question within this same question. Do you still own your publishing rights? Was that something that someone came up to you and wanted to offer you money for publishing rights? How does that work in the music industry?
Well, these are all sort of strategic things, really, that happened over the years. But I think Nick and I were very fortunate to have a good manager who was a friend as well as a manager, and he really looked out for us, and he did deals that were good. And to be honest, when we did a couple of big deals in the 80s, he took a lot of the money and put it in a pension fund, I was like, you can't have that money, So I never was like, bought a Ferrari or kind of like had money to burn. In fact, I was fairly, not impoverished, but, I didn't have a lot of money, to sort of splash around at any point, really, during the sort of 80s and 90s. And it's only more recently, I think, when we did actually do a sort of publishing deal. And, we sort of made an offer we couldn't refuse, sort of thing. So it's only been more latterly that we've had some money, and that's good. A good time to have money is when you're in your 50s, sort of thing, when you're a little more careful about what you're going to do with it. And sometimes I sort of think, well, maybe it would have been fun to have a Ferrari, do you know what I mean? But I don't know. It never appealed. I was never that interested in all that stuff, do you know? And I guess, again, this sort of high focus on music, I still I still am obsessed with music. Do you know what I mean? I'm really fascinated by it, you know, and so that's my interest. So buying a guitar here and there is probably about as extravagant as I got.
Was the video making process a pain in the ass?
In a way, it was at the time. You know, I was never a big fan of the videos. You know, growing up in the 70s, effectively, you know, when prog bands made these albums where you put them on, put the vinyl on, sit back, shut your eyes, and just have this imaginative experience. That to me was powerful, you know. And you know, MTV videos where it sort of gives you a scenario and tells you what to think almost, you know. I never particularly liked that. But that sounds very mean to say that, doesn't it? You know, when a lot of my, you know, you're aware of me because I was on MTV for every afternoon in your living room, sort of thing, you know. So there was a massive upside to it, you know. But I did tend to leave the video production to the video creatives, you know, and they did what they did. I think the only one that me and Nick really got involved in was Everybody Have Fun Tonight, where we had quite a strong sense of wanting to have this sort of cut up, sort of slow, well, it's not, you know, the jerky kind of thing, you know. And I guess that was very inspired by Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer video, you know, so stop motion was very much the flavour of the month, you know? So we wanted something like that. And yeah, we worked with Kevin Godley and Lord Cream, who were the sort of top guys at the time. So that was a great video to make. I enjoyed that very much.
With the new album Primitive, with the 16 new tracks, and I will also let everybody know where they can get it and all that kind of stuff when I publish this this show. Yeah. After the lockdown is over, or are you going to go out and tour with it, or and where would that be?
Well, I'd love to do some stuff in the States, you know, but obviously people have certainly heard of Wang, probably not so much of Jack Hues, you know, but there's a growing awareness, and I would love to do some club dates, you know, with the band I have in the UK, or whatever, you know. There's all. I think the great experience of working on my jazz stuff is that I'm much more used to working with different musicians, you know, and because of my training, I can sort of write out parts and stuff, you know, so I can sort of give music to guys, count them in, and we play it. Do you know what I mean? So a lot of rock bands are rehearsing for like sort of 6 weeks or something, aren't they, before they can play the first tune, you know. But so I'm quite into sort of doing some touring and maybe playing some of the jazz stuff and Primitif and then some Wang stuff and really sort of mixing it up. That would be fun to do.
How did you come up with the name Jack Hues?
Well, it was in the, I guess, the sort of mid-70s, and when some of the punk bands were emerging, and they all had these sort of like made-up names, you know. So Joe Strummer and Johnny Rotten, Sting, you know, they were all kind of had these names. So a friend of mine came up with Jack Hues, you know, which is this French thing. Jack Hues was a book by Émile Zola about a sort of a kind of, what's the word? Yeah, dereliction of justice. Do you know what I mean? This guy was put in jail, do you know, for something he didn't do. You know? And Jack Hues was, I accuse you of being corrupt. Do you know what I mean? And it was subsequently taken up as various people wrote Jack Hues pamphlets about different things. You know? So this friend of mine was laughing and saying, that would be funny, wouldn't it, Jack Hues? You know, this kind of guy was just angry about everything. You know? So I wrote a song called I'm Jack Hues around that idea. This is going right back to, like I say, it's 1978, 79, when I first met Nick. And, you know, my real name is Jeremy Ryder. And I was in this punk band. And I remember the drummer in the band, Paul Hammond. He was a lovely guy. And he sort of said, I can't deal with calling you Jeremy. I'm going to call you Jack. So Jack stuck. And everybody knows me as Jack these days. I think only my parents call me Jeremy still. So.
How do you feel about I Love the 80s? I mean, the tour, you know, is it a, do you want to push on like with your brand new album Primitive, or do you enjoy doing these you know, these interviews with me, going out on the road with I Love the 80s? I know you've taken a break from it a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, I'm happy to do those things. You know, obviously it's getting a balance and stuff. You know, I don't do all of those 80s shows, but I'm happy to do some of them. You know, and a mix of Primitif and that stuff is what I want to do. You know, I'd love to do sort of bigger shows with Wang Chung where we can play more stuff, as I said. You know, but I'm happy to play Dance All Days to anybody who will listen. You know,
Gordon Lightfoot had the #2 song for 6 weeks in a row behind Rod Stewart's Tonight's the Night, and I always wondered what he thought, so I'm going to ask you. You guys were behind the Bangles.
Yeah.
Without getting to that ultimate #1, does that you think about that occasionally, or did you open up Billboard and Cashbox to see if you guys had hit number one, or
Yeah.
how was that feeling of that time and getting a number one?
Yeah. I guess it all felt like a bonus. Do you know what I mean? Without seeming like I do care, we were number one on Cashbox on that week and number two on Billboard.
Okay.
So I felt like we kind of made it, but it was good enough, and I don't mind. The number two slot is fine for me. Actually, they're still pretty good.
Jack Hues, the name of the album is Primitif. It's been awesome. It's a bucket list item of me chatting with you. This is amazing. I think of those days a lot. Of course, I keep the nostalgia alive, so that's the reason why I'm into what I'm into. But thank you so much. Can you let everybody know where they can actually get the album?
Yeah, well, best place is probably my website, which is www.jackhues.com. Very easy. And Hughes is spelled without the GH, so Hues. And you can listen to it on Spotify and all those digital platforms. But I did make it so that you the ultimate listening experience is on vinyl, and also you get all the packaging and the sleeve notes and lyric sheets and all of that stuff. So buy some physical copy, and you'll enjoy it.
Well, that's awesome, and I think when everybody watches this video, everybody will have fun tonight.
I hope they do. Stay safe and see you on the other side of all this.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Jack.
It's a pleasure.